So I've been working on an essay using the Jay Shetty controversy from earlier this year, kind of as a backdrop to talk more in depth about individuality and how the way our system and structure is set up makes the controversy around him not all that surprising. I would even argue it's kind of expected at this point, I think, but as I've been working on it, I've realized I had a kind of like side discussion, rant even, I guess you could say, and information going on within the essay that might be getting a bit too in the weeds. So I thought I'd cover it on my second channel that I haven't used a lot and see what people think. Anyway, I've been thinking about the idea of capital and our cultural system, and all the entirety of the system pushing us to kind of destroy ourselves or annihilate ourselves in some sense. And I'll unpack that, but like the idea is that as we become more individualized, the structure in our society pushes us towards, I think, commodities that push us to slowly deconstruct ourselves so that you can get something sold back to you, basically. So that they can then sell you more commodities. So basically we are pushed to deconstruct our sense of self through commodification. So we then become increasingly atomized and isolated. And our societal structure pushes us toward self-exploration through the kind of disguise of empowerment, right? Now, I'm not saying all self-improvement is bad, obviously. I hope that's obvious at least. But it's also kind of like turned into a large economic market that I think wishes to take advantage of your discontent and desire for that improvement. But take advantage of it is the key phrase here. It feels as though on a very individual level, we are trying to sort of, convince ourselves of some like shared reality, but focusing, I think, on the wrong things. So it's something like this, where on a subconscious level, I think we believe that the way to avoid annihilation of the self is through this consumption. You consume yourself to maintain yourself in a way. And the way you do this is by embracing the definition that various structures impose upon us and impose upon you and me and all that stuff. So then during that process, I think you convince yourself that it was you defining yourself all along, and I fall into the same stuff. All the stuff I'm saying, it's like I still fall into the same thing. But I think the self-help industry is where it's like most obvious. It's run by people, organizations, personalities, influencers, corporations, even, that rely on you trying to fixating on the idea of you, also fixating on the idea of fixing you, you, the individual. So the self-help industry has endless talking heads and books from Jordan Peterson, Tony Robbins, Jay Shetty, like I mentioned earlier, the people who give kind of like poor interpretations also of, Stoicism, and are unfortunately some of the most recognized faces in philosophy, topic for a different day. But, I think Deleuze and Guattari talk about this in Anti-Oedipus, where they play with the idea that capitalism is inherently schizophrenic. It decodes and recodes desires, which then produces fragmented identities that are continually reshaped to fit the market pressures and logic. So we then feel the pressure to explore ourselves because of that, something that I do think is innately human to explore, but the ways that exploration gets expressed is something I think we need to be mindful of. So we are presented under our current system, is what we're presented with is the commodification, and this often becomes a cycle of consumption and further consumption, trying to reach some endpoint that I think doesn't really exist. So I think part of this is an argument for another video, but take talk therapy, for example. It seems like every meme and solution has become, you need therapy, or claiming it's like a green flag if you go to therapy. But in many ways, I think the industry has been streamlined into a focus on being a consumable product. So you have your kind of Zoom call with your therapist, you check in on your self-care app, and you check up on your kind of mindfulness subscription, and then you grab a book that wishes for you to think about yourself, and the title probably has like some certain word with an asterisk on it to kind of seem like edgy and rebellious, really getting at something there, hoorah, I'm going against the society by focusing on myself. But is that really going against anything? So your identity becomes a thing you consume, and in doing so, I think it consumes consumes you right back, it makes it so that you can't be without constantly buying, and this next part is something I'm trying to further develop, but I feel like this kind of more modern obsession with identity and individuality is connected with the growing distrust of the media, and just as a distrust of any established narrative. Really, that's what's growing. The digital spaces we exist in have, in many ways, eroded our shared sense of reality. So before the age of infamous information that we have now, where we now have hyperconnectivity and endless digital distractions, I think we had more of a solid consensus on what was real in some sense. Now, with the vast information space, we exist in a more kind of fragmented reality. I don't think that's a hot take. So leaving us kind of uncertain about what is actually shared more generally, or in some sense. This is where I think conspiracy theories arise more, as I think they thrive in these kind of fragmented information ecosystems, where moments of schizoid narratives that attempt to universalize and make sense of some narrative, well, they start gaining more traction because those narratives find people with a shared discontent, a discontent that festers because we have an abundance of conflicting data, information, which makes it then difficult to establish kind of common ground on truth and narratives. So this leading to kind of a further paranoia and social division, where now we cannot even agree on the weather and what causes the weather. And before the digital age, though, the media acted as kind of a gatekeeper of reality, providing a relatively limited but consistent version of events. While these narratives weren't flawless, obviously, I have my issues with that system too, they offered a kind of shared framework for people to understand the world. Television news, print media, and even radio kind of created a sense of shared reality. But with the internet and social media and the proliferation of digital platforms, I think we've entered an era where each individual can tailor their reality according to their own preferences, beliefs, and biases. That last part being the important part, So the internet democratized information, as it claims. But in doing so, I think it also dissolved the gatekeeping function of the kind of traditional media. So we no longer rely on a few trusted sources. Instead, we kind of cherry pick information from countless voices, some credible, some not. And this ability to curate and create kind of personal information bubbles, I think that directly reflects the kind of hyper individualization fostered by capitalism. So as consumers, we are given endless choices and encouraged to shape our identity through consumption. And our news and information intake has followed a very similar path, becoming just another form of personal curation. Like I said, though, this is not to say that mainstream media or the old system of media was perfect by any means, but there's I think an important awareness to something that was lost. So, like I said, I want to emphasize, I'm not saying that news media before was all well and good. It was still very corporate-backed media. It still had its intentions were maybe not best for the public good, for example. But there's still something to be said about the loss of a shared space, a loss of a shared reality, and what that means for our future, our culture, and the health of that future. I mean, just step on over to Twitter and see what happens when you have hyper-individualized groupthink, where you have an algorithm that prioritizes certain information, and also one that considers your previous engagements, and then you have it reinforcing existing beliefs. This then creates an echo chamber that convinces you that you are seeking out some radical information. It makes you feel rebellious. It really does. I get the same feeling. That's why I'm skeptical even the things that I'm saying right here, right now. It makes you feel different. All these algorithms, they want to make you feel different and special. But all the while, you have found yourself further into isolated information bubbles, deepening divisions and creating kind of an erosion of trust in shared narratives because we want to be special, I mean, think of the phrase, do your own research. It feels harmless. It feels that phrase feels very democratic, very harmless. But if the current structure wishes to take advantage of that hyper individualism, what is the result of that? Truth becomes just another product. It's something to be customized and consumed. As consumers, then we are taught that our individual choices define us. This is the democratic process. So this also, I think, extends beyond products into the realm of information and truth itself. So the narrative you choose to believe becomes part of your identity, and one that becomes algorithmically predictable, and one that you can then predict the desires of, and the products they will be more likely to buy, be it a subscription, an influencer, a book, or even food, anything and everything decided that way. This is where I'm hoping to find some conclusion or proper way to word it, I guess, because I'm not trying to play sides here. I'm noticing a discontent across the board in every human group, everywhere. We feel fragmented. We feel isolated. We feel alone in many ways. And I think this is kind of true in human history, I guess, but also I feel like we do actually have a very unique circumstance now with how much we rely on digital spaces when it comes to information. So it's like many conservatives, for example, they feel a sense of nostalgia for the past. They feel that the change that is happening in reality, but they feel that change. But I think they're focusing on the wrong people and the wrong things. They still identify with consumerism, for example, but maybe not recognizing how that consumerism is fueling that fragmentation. So just think what would the Daily Wire do? What would the Daily Wire do? Will it still exist and make as much money as it does if it stopped trying to make its viewers mad and fearful of every little thing that they cover? I'm not saying that just the Daily Wire does that, but I'm saying a conservative example, the Daily Wire does that, right? What would happen? What would happen if they stopped doing that? Would the left seem like such a massive contradiction and such a fraud if they didn't pick and choose what they moralize about that often so happens to align with corporate interests? Or what would happen if the managerial class that dominates the left stopped hyperfixating on their moralized aesthetics and instead actually started caring about, things like income inequality and uniting the workers? It would push through the contradiction that I think many people observe consciously or subconsciously. At a deep level, many people feel the discontent of living in fragmented realities. We feel it, we see it, we witness it. Conspiracy theories, media distrust, and the splintering of truth are symptoms of a deeper desire for a shared narrative that unites rather than divides. So despite this, I think we remain kind of trapped in a culture that keeps us focused on ourselves as individuals rather than addressing the kind of collective forces that are driving this discontent and keeping it bubbling and formulated. So we are told that the answer to our confusion or alienation lies in self-discovery or self-improvement, blah, blah, blah. But this individual focus, I think, diverts our attention from the fact that much of our alienation comes from the very system that profits from our fragmentation. The corporations and algorithms that control the media we consume, shaping our experiences and feeding into the cycle of consumerism. So the rise of, say, the wellness industry, for example, it's a great example of how the system keeps us focused on the self. Rather than addressing the structural, causes of stress, anxiety, or dissatisfaction, like income inequality, job insecurity, or mental health impact of, say, the gig economy, the constant work to improve, blah, blah, blah. We are sold solutions like meditation apps, self-care routines, or supplements. That's what we're sold. The individual is told that they can fix themselves only if they consume the right products, rather than questioning the system that is causing widespread harm in the first place, that is actually fueling your discontent from the structure that way, collectively. So the fixation on the individual identity, driven by both consumerism and the media, that keeps us from recognizing this shared kind of, I think, collective harm caused by the very system we live in. We are encouraged to focus on our personal brands, to perform our identities, and to seek personal validation through consumption, always, whether it's through social media likes, clothing, or lifestyle choices. And I think this is kind of obvious, but this creates a narcissistic loop where, like I said, I don't escape this stuff either. It creates a narcissistic loop where we are constantly looking inward rather than outward, preventing us from seeing the larger structures that are causing a collective harm, shared, intersubjectively interconnected collective harm. So this obsession with the self ensures that we don't organize collectively to challenge the real sources of our discontent. Corporations, capitalist structures, to use that scary word, and the algorithms that manipulate our perceptions. Instead of coming together to address issues like income inequality and corporate power and, environmental destruction, we are encouraged to see ourselves as isolated individuals responsible for our own problems, responsible for society's problems, and the solutions to these problems, we are told, can always be bought. So in our neoliberal society, we are constantly tasked with optimizing ourselves, taking responsibility for our own success and happiness, rather than recognizing that many of the problems we face are rooted in the systems that are currently exploiting all of us. So the point is, our obsession with the identity and individuality in modern consumer society feeds directly into media distrust as individuals. We are encouraged to construct our own realities. So then we don't distrust all media. We only distrust some media. And even if our chosen media gets millions of views and has millions of followers, we wish to claim, oh, I don't follow mainstream media, man. I'm on seeking that truth from that rebellious side of media. Millions of people view it. It's mainstream, man. So the reality we wish to construct is often one we wish to feel is rebellious. But is it? What we do have is fragmented or fragmentized individuals, a fragmentized, individualized approach to truth that undermines any shared sense of reality, leading to a deepening of paranoia and division. So essentially, media distrust is a product of consumerism where individuals are primed to reject anything that feels universal or mainstream in favor of personalized niche narratives. So the more fragmented the information system becomes, the more susceptible we are to narratives that promise a unified explanation, even if that explanation is completely outlandish and absurd. And often those outlandish ones feel rebellious. Hint, hint. All I'm saying is we should be more mindful of the thing that might have us avoiding an awareness of some shared collective harm. I don't have a solution really either. I'm not smart enough for that. But we need to shift our focus from the individual to the collective. We need to recognize that our discontent is shared. The problems we face, whether they are economic, environmental, or social, those are rooted in the structures of power that benefit from our division. So only by moving beyond the obsession with individual identity and consumption can we begin to challenge the system and work toward kind of a shared reality that reflects collective well-being rather than individual consumption.